Great. How's everyone doing today? I've been talking to some of our majors, and they're like, next week is going to be crazy. I've got exams or papers or something going on. So I hope you're all, staying on top of things and trying to chip away at them, doing like a little bit at a time to maintain a high level of sanity, which is always important. But yeah, man, I just think we have to like step back and be like, wow, we're doing something we've never done before, right? All this, in the middle of this pandemic, we've been able to keep college open and doing things differently than we ever have before, as far as, all our classes online and, everything's different. So I think in those days those moments when we maybe feel a little frustrated and maybe feel like, oh, I should have done better on that exam or that paper, or this is different. I just just give yourself a pat on the back for just hanging in there and working through it. And I don't know, I'm just trying to look at this as an opportunity to develop new skills and abilities that we wouldn't have before, because there's going to be a time when we're not going to be having to wear all these masks and do all this social distancing and spend 8 hours a day on Zoom. And in those times, hopefully we'll have things that we developed in this time, like, resilience and flexibility and determination and all those things that we wouldn't be able to work through this situation without, right? Hopefully we'll have a little higher store of all those things to draw on when we have other challenges that come up. So I'm just trying to look at this whole thing in that context, like it's a chance for me to develop some skills and abilities that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And hopefully y'all are able to look at it in a similar way. And yeah, and I was just talking to someone on the walk over here from my first class, and it's just showing us kind of how important like people are to us too, right? Like just like the reduced number of interactions with folks that we have. Like it just, I don't know, just reminds me that we're all like one human community, and like we need to stay in contact. And I don't know, it's unfortunate that, of course, with this election year, there's lots of propaganda from different sides saying why these people aren't good and those people aren't good. And it's hard now because we're interacting with people less than usual, but I just think we've got to step back and think that, when it all comes down to it, we're all human beings. And, when we miss interaction with all our fellow human beings, I think it reminds us of that even more. So when you have some time, when you're not working on an assignment or, studying for an exam or whatever it is, just find a little quiet time, and however you want to do it. If you're writing in a journal or just reflecting on your own mind, and just kind of think about this time, and what, I don't know, like what do you think, you have been learning from it, right? And what have we all been kind of taken from this? Because this is a significant event, man. They're going to be talking about this time for decades. And we've been living through it, and we're going to tell our kids about it and our grandkids about it and all that. And what are we going to tell them? And what are we going to look back and think that, we wish that we would have taken advantage of or done? So, yeah, just being real compassionate with each other and ourselves, and just stepping back and realizing that it's pretty gosh darn amazing that, we're showing just how adaptable we are. So, anyway, I've been real impressed just with all the students here, with all of y'all that are doing what you need to do, and not complaining about it a whole lot, and just kind of keeping everyone safe. And so far so good, right? So I pick out readings that I think bring in perspectives or examples that are interesting to the class that are different from what we're talking about in lecture. And just a heads up, for next class there's another article on Moodle. It looks at how population developed in the Machakos region of Kenya in Africa. It's kind of an interesting case study of how human impacts on the environment might not always go the way that we would predict. So be sure to go on Moodle and read this. It's probably a 10-minute read. It's a fairly short article written for a popular audience, but be sure and take a look at that for next class. Because I don't know, there might be a celebration or something. I don't know. Okay, so this article talks about this concept of sustainable development. And if we remember back in the day, around 1900, Forest Service mentioned this idea of like we want to meet the needs of our society, right? We have to meet our own needs, but doing that in a way that won't compromise the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so this is the way the United Nations defines sustainable development around the world. Development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so this is really kind of at the core of environmental science, because in a lot of cases, the way that development can compromise the ability of future generations to meet their own needs is by reducing the environment's ability to meet those needs down the road. Right? And so this can be by overusing resources, by high rates of pollution, whatever it is, it can make it harder to meet those needs down the road. So the other article that we looked at for today was this article that says 2019 was the best year ever. So, I don't know. Y'all lived through 2019. I don't know if you thought it was the best year ever or not. But can someone mention some of the reasons that this author argues that 2019 was the best year ever? Yeah, rates of child mortality globally, probably lower than they've ever been. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So a global reduction in the amount of people living in what we call destitute poverty, like not enough means to provide them with what they need to survive. Yeah, yeah.
Adult literacy is like the highest.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So all those are true, yeah. Say that again? You know, I hate these masks and these barriers because it's really hard for me to... Can you say that one more time? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Global famines as well have become less common. So those are all good things, right? And the way that I kind of broke it down, so yeah, these lowest rates, what you all said, lowest global rates of child mortality ever, this huge reduction in global poverty, as was mentioned. It says that in 1981, over 40% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty, and this is defined based on like, I think it was $2 a day of income. $2 a day or a month? I can't remember. But that number dropped from 42% to less than 10% by 2019. So a lot less people in extreme poverty. Highest rates ever of global literacy. And then as was mentioned, these famines, which folks have sort of like, I don't know, there's still this narrative of like these massive global famines always going on that lots of people are dying from. Those have been quite a bit lower as well. So what did y'all think reading this article? Did you think, yeah, I mean, the world in some ways is a lot better place than it's been 40, 50 years ago. What were your, I'm curious, just if some folks wouldn't mind sharing, what was your reaction to this article?
I just thought it was funny how it came out in 2019 and it talked somewhat about disease and whatnot, and then 2020 came in and all this shit.
Yeah, right. I know. You would not write that article this year, would you, saying 2020 was the best year ever, even though, for all we know, maybe these numbers kept getting better, right? Yeah. Yeah. I forget, you guys both had your hands up as well. If you both want to share that, that's great.
I just said, like, generally, yeah, like, there definitely are some things, but the wording was kind of off-putting. Like, there was this one little sentence that was like, well, if you look at, like, kids die every 6 seconds, but, like, they used to die every 3, so, but, like, just the wording is kind of, like,
So you're drawing an important distinction there we're not maybe where we want to be, but maybe we're moving in the right direction, right? Yeah, certainly still inequities, but maybe getting a little bit better, yeah.
I think it's hard to, with like the modern age of like media and how widespread information can be, and why oftentimes it feels like things are just going downhill because now we as like a population are more aware of things happening in other areas due to media and news reporting and things of that nature. So it can oftentimes feel as though they're new and recurring, but in reality they've been happening for forever. It's just not been as widely reported to the general public.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I also agree with Kayla about the wording was a little like kids still like the fact that kids are still dying every 6 seconds is kind of messed up. And like it comes with like a positivity in the light of negative, but it's there's I don't remember much of a mention of moving forward how we can continue to decrease exponentially these things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wonder too, like kind of the narrative, like as Jay had mentioned too, like sometimes it feels like the COVID pandemic sort of like highlighted even more like kind of like where there were problems, like where like social inequity like plays a role in like who is getting sick the most and who's dying the most. Like, yeah, maybe it sort of feels like since then the pandemic has kind of like maybe highlighted some of those issues potentially too, yeah. Yeah, you're right. It wasn't written from the perspective of like, we're doing great, let's keep going, you know. And it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek article. I mean, it's like, yeah, we know we're not in the best place we could be, but, you know, but it is interesting, right? Because there is this sort of narrative of things getting worse and worse and worse, when in fact, globally, there is progress that's being made, which to me, it just tells me that we can get better, like that we can, right? Other thoughts from this article? Yeah, so there's this perspective, right? And so then, you know, part of us might wonder then, like, if things are getting better, then, you know, why is it the United Nations still has this focus on sustainable development? And, you know, the UN, I think, gets a bad rap in a lot of places. I think in the U.S. it's not looked on very favorably politically right now because there's this idea that, you know, it's this big organization with like all of this bureaucracy and all of this waste. But in fact, when you look back at the victories from the last 50 years, the UN has played a big role in a lot of it. These programs all over the world. So yeah, really, I mean, if we come back to these 3 pillars of sustainable development, so economic development, of course, is a piece of that for sure. But then also social equity and environmental protection, you know, I kind of feel like the stats that were shared in the 2019 article are talking a lot about this, which is great, right? But, you know, these concepts maybe are what we're a little more concerned about now potentially. We've been doing okay on this, but then what about these 2 here? So again, back to this definition of sustainable development. Okay, so maybe we're doing okay at meeting the needs of the present, but maybe the concern is a little bit more like, okay, like how are people in the future going to be able to meet their own needs potentially? And you know, so data are still there. So for instance, these are data on life expectancy around the globe. I forget if I shared them the other day or not, and I know you can't see these numbers over there. But if you can, you don't need glasses. So this darkest red is a life expectancy that's less than 55 years. And the darkest green is a life expectancy over 80. So, you know, clearly when we look across the planet, there's still inequity, right? If we can live to have a life expectancy over 80 in Canada, well, why not try and spread that around to all the countries of the world, right, if we can? So again, these inequities are like calorie consumption, so access to resource. We have inequity there. Same thing with energy consumption, a lot of variation. So there's still a lot of variation in access to resources, essentially, as we move around the globe. So this is what I want to do for probably close to the rest of class here. So I'll tell you what, why don't you go ahead, and I always tell you this to you after you've sat down, right? But why don't you go ahead and just move yourself so you're kind of like 1 seat away from somebody, so you're in a place that you can discuss. And if you want to discuss back and forth across the barrier, that works as well. But let's just take a moment, and if you need to, relocate yourself to a place where you can engage in this discussion, and then we'll read over these questions, okay? Do you remember the times in class when we used to be able to be like, okay, now like circle your chairs up in a group of 4 and discuss this? We don't do that now. We don't do that anymore. And I apologize if like you share a comment and I look at somebody else, because half the time like I can't really figure out like where the comment's coming from. And I can't see people's mouths moving either, so it's like, who is it? Cool. So if you don't know the name of the person that you're going to be discussing with, go ahead and introduce yourselves now before we get started. All right, and I'd like at least one person in each group to kind of jot down some notes, because I'd like to share what we come up with on these questions at the end of our discussion, okay? And when I say jot down, you can record them on your laptop for sure. So here's some questions that I'd like to hear what y'all think about. The first is, this article talks about the fact that development has been described as largely just economic growth, right? So what issues arise from this orientation of development as purely economic growth, right? What are some of the problems with that? And then this idea that sustainable development, on the other hand, is an environmental issue. So kind of these two silos. We've got economic growth over here, the environment over here. What have been some of the issues, some of the consequences of doing things in this way? And then following up on that, how do the authors claim that this should be addressed? The next question, how do you feel that they should be addressed? What do you think we should do to try to solve these issues that have come out of this? Now there's a quote in there from a former US president who says that the American way of life is not negotiable. So I'm just curious what you think about that. And then the final question, how do high rates of consumption in the US affect the ability of people in other countries to meet their present needs or meet the needs of future generations? So kind of getting at this idea of connectivity, because it's easy to look at a different part of the globe and think, well, you know, they have these problems that they're working on, right? But I think our connections among different parts of the world are becoming more and more clear. So like, how do high rates of consumption in the US affect the ability of other countries to develop sustainably? Any questions, anything that isn't clear on that? And if you just find one of these questions that interests you and you just go off on that, that's okay, because I want you to talk about what interests you here. So if you have time, it'd be great to get to all 5, but if you really go deep on one of them, like, that's okay. Like, don't cut that conversation short. Like, you know, go wherever you want to go on this. So any questions about that? So let's just take about 20 minutes, and as I said, if you could just jot down a couple of the ideas that you talk about in your group as you go, right? So we can share these when we get back together. So yeah, let's go ahead and see what you think about these.